Maybe some states like Texas and California that have large internal economies by themselves could become individual nation states. But for the most part, you're going to have like the states of New England form a little compact. What we have this week on the main part of the segment is a couple weeks ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted something which David and I can fully agree with and have repeatedly on this podcast. And I just got to say, like, why do these things always have to come with people that come from people that we don't want to like, right? It's never, somebody well, I should say, never people with a platform or being a sitting congresswoman or congressman, the way Marjorie Taylor Greene is, saying things like this that we're like, yeah, that person's awesome, and they're going to defend the idea. It's always somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene. But anyway, her and the rest of the chicanery she involves herself in, notwithstanding, this tweet is 100% on point. But the reaction to it tells you all you need to know about how much these people refuse to think for themselves. So the Greene tweet first, and then we'll get into some reactions to it. So Marjorie Taylor Greene created a massive outrage when she tweeted, quote, "We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this." And then her tweet talks about, shoving woke culture down our throats and Democrats' traitorous or America last policies, et cetera, et cetera. But the key takeaway is national divorce, red states, blue states, shrink the federal government. This is generally a popular idea. I'm going to have to disagree with Greene in the assertion that everyone I talk to says this. Maybe everyone she talks to, but I really don't think that this is a popular idea. I think a vanishingly small percent of the American public like this idea for all of the reasons that we're going to get to in the responses to this tweet. But all of those reasons are wrong. And this is, to the name of this podcast, Weapons of Meme Destruction, one of the absolute most important memes to destroy. This idea that secession is inherently anti-American, how it's treasonous, that the Constitution disallows it, that the might makes right of the Civil War settled this question forever and always, that the United States, as it's currently constituted, is some magical geographic area defined by God himself, which shall never, ever be broken up in the history of ever, that secessionist movements don't happen across the world all throughout human history and go on a daily basis. Like this idea that it's just unconscionable that somebody would think about a subset of a larger political unit saying, I don't think my interests are being represented. I want to break away to my own thing and rule my own life. That's a concept as old as time. And it is very, very American. And David and I are going to destroy the meme that it's not and use some foils on Twitter to provide context for these examples.
Well, I'm a secession hesitant, shall we say? Can I come up with that term? I'd really prefer to work things out. I feel like divorce is the last stage when there is just no ground to recover. Stay together for the kids at the end of the day. We'll get them through high school. Once we get there, we might as well stay together because who else is going to fuck us, right? So you got to just stay together. We'll just not look at each other. We won't talk. I'll watch my shows in my den. You do your things in your place, and we'll sleep in separate beds, and we'll just stay married. And that's that. Well, that's what we've been doing for the last, 30 years plus? Like, we've been going down a road for a long time. And it got exacerbated. Everyone wants to blame Trump, but it really got bad around Obama. And it just seems like if for nothing else in a relationship, you do have to fire a howitzer across somebody's bow for them to understand that you mean business. And I don't like secession. I don't like it. I know Dane said that we were both amicable with it. I believe in it. I don't want to do it. I think it's an ejection seat. I think we aren't saving this plane. It's going down, and this is the only way for us to survive right now. However, before I kick it back over to my wonderful co-host over here, beautiful Vanna White, I think that you need to be able to talk in this country again, and we've degraded so far that we can't talk to anybody anymore. Dang.
Well, if I fail in my mission by the end of this episode, so over the next 10 to 15 minutes, if I fail in my mission to convince David away from that position, that's okay, because this podcast should show you that people who have a general respect for each other can disagree on really important issues and still stay cordial and friendly and respectful, et cetera, et cetera. But that notwithstanding, I wouldn't be me if I didn't try to convince David anyway. So let's use some tweets from Blue Checkmark Twitter to be our sort of pedagogical tools to not only destroy the meme that secession is very American, but is also a laudable, good thing, a socially useful and beneficial thing, and is actually the most humane way of dealing with the current situation that we're in this country. Let's use some examples from Blue Checkmark Drooling Twitter to kind of tease out some of these lessons. So the first one is from Liz Cheney, and she says, "Let's review some of the governing principles of America, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Our country is governed by the Constitution. You swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Secession is unconstitutional. No member of Congress should advocate secession, Marjorie." First of all, the meme floating right there in the middle, secession is unconstitutional.
Well, she should know better because she's a goddamn representative of this country.
She lost her seat because
she was. Well, maybe she should have lost it sooner, because what the fuck was she doing there representing us?
So anyway, the meme
not
is
knowing the Constitution.
Secession is unconstitutional.
Jesus Christ.
It's not even close. Not only is secession not at all mentioned in the Constitution anywhere, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which deals with the restrictions on state power vis-a-vis the federal government, makes no mention whatsoever about a state not being allowed to leave the compact that the states formed when they created the federal government. So I'm sorry to tell you, Liz, your whole premise there is just wrong. But let's track back to that first part about let's review some of the governing principles of America. All right, Liz. Well, I think of the people, by the people, for the people is one of those alleged professed governing principles of America. The idea of a representative government, right? No taxation without representation, right? That's supposed to be a governing principle of America. Or what about the idea of a republic versus a democracy? A republic where the rights of the citizens are protected and held sacrosanct above and beyond the power of the government, versus a democracy where simply might makes right and your rights are constantly up for negotiation and debate. Those are some pretty foundational governing principles of America, but that's not at all what the federal government does. It's not of, by, and for the people. And one example of that is the fact that Congress has a constant approval rating under 10%, yet has a re-election rate over 90%. Does that seem to you, Liz, like the people's voice is really being heard in Washington, D.C.? Or what about the idea of a representative government, right? Let's just focus on one area of that. No taxation without representation. There are taxes passed all the time that you have no say in. We don't get a say in the establishment of the federal income tax, which before 1913 was unconstitutional. It might be constitutional via amendment now, but David and I didn't get a choice in that. You know, anybody alive today, except for the very, very old, weren't even alive when that happened. Well, so that's out the window. And then the idea that that this country is a republic anymore. I mean, it is, but it doesn't operate as such. It operates like a might makes right democracy, where as long as 51% get their way, the other 49% need to come to heel. So I would focus a little bit more on those governing principles, Liz, rather than being completely wrong about the foundational document on which you base your claims, because it says nothing at all about secession. So
You know what, Dane?
period, full stop, right there. Secession is not unconstitutional.
We need to give her a little benefit of the doubt. Okay? She's genetically predisposed to not know about the Constitution or give a fuck about it. Okay? She's Dick Cheney's daughter.
Right.
The guy that got us into a 20-year war so that his former employers could make a mass amount of profit, if for nothing else. And I'm sure there was more devious machinations involved. So why would she be... again, me being me, if my father was literally somebody that killed millions of people, I'd probably shut the fuck up for the rest of my life. Unless I had something really important to say. And guess what? Before I said it, I'd make sure it was ironclad. I'd make sure there wasn't any flaws in my argument or my stance. And on top of all of that, I'd probably still shut the fuck up. Because the people already voted. You're not in office anymore. I know you're still trying to make a career for yourself, but nobody wants to hear about the bastard child of the Antichrist that got us into a 20-year war that blew millions of people to smithereens on both sides that will never be accounted for profit. So,
well, her sins and the sins of her father notwithstanding, I hope, David, if we had a little tracker here, a David tracker, right? On the spectrum of David likes secession, David doesn't like secession. Have on the destruction of the meme that secession is unconstitutional. Have we moved David at all closer towards the side of the spectrum that secession is a good thing?
I didn't.
Or is he still neutral? There's more steps to go. So if you haven't moved, that's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to see where we need to move.
It takes more than
a little David head.
It takes more than just a little fucking tweet from a former representative.
Ignore who it came from. Focus on the meme.
My
Secession is unconstitutional.
My whole point being wrong. I didn't say it was wrong. I never said it was wrong.
I'm not saying
I said it's illegal, but it's a last ditch resort, and I'd like to exhaust every effort before we pull these.
We know your position. What I'm saying is, did that do anything in terms of moving the little David head?
Literally nothing.
Okay. Next meme. We have the intellectual heavyweight.
If only we had a professional that can create a little image of David's head moving.
We're going to see how it is.
Yeah, we'll see.
Moving on to the intellectual heavyweight that is David Hogg. And he says, quote, quite frankly, and this is a reply to Marjorie Taylor Greene or a quote tweet. He says, quite frankly, these remarks are unacceptable, un-American, and unbecoming of an elected official to us.
Sorry, how did we get started?
And unbecoming of an elected official to the House of Representatives. I think I sensed that David head moving. This behavior has no place in America. Now I understand why my father and friends left the Republican Party. David has already jumped the gun and snatched that low-hanging fruit, right? The un-American and unbecoming of an elected official of the United States, and this behavior has no place in America, is so easily destroyed with the simple fact that this country was literally founded on American citizens shooting at agents of the state. Okay? Now, you can say Dane's just trying to get black-bagged again and he's calling for insurrection and whatever you want to say, but you can't deny the historical facts of where this country came from.
Terrorism.
David Hogg. The fact that your name is David is not lost on me, Mr. Hogg. Anyway.
You're making us look bad, you dickhead.
Anyway, so the fact that you think this is un-American is, again, doesn't even pass the laugh test when you consider how this country was founded. But let's go a little bit deeper because there's probably a lot of history that you didn't learn because your state propaganda that doesn't want to teach you the uncomfortable history that would lead you to the conclusion that secession is a good thing. David Bobblehead movie. Is not taught to you.
I dictate when it moves.
Is not
I dictate. I'm in control of my bobblehead, okay? I give consent for my bobblehead and its pronouns.
So let's do a couple historical examples. So after, because you might say, Mr. Hogg, you might say, well, okay, fine, the revolution, but the United States didn't exist yet. The Constitution didn't exist yet. So America didn't exist yet. All right, fine, grant you, whatever. I'll concede that argument for a second.
Strawest of arguments.
After the United States was created, one of the first secessionist movements in this country was not by the South in the Civil War. It was by, I want to say it was either Connecticut or Massachusetts. I think it was Connecticut, who threatened to leave the Union over conscription into the War of 1812. They did not agree with the federal government's decision to fight the British, and they didn't want to see Connecticut boys or Massachusetts, whichever it was.
I knew they didn't like Connecticut.
They didn't want to see their Connecticut boys being marched off to a war that they didn't agree with. They didn't find was in their best interest, and didn't find that it was in the interest of the young nation of America. And they threatened secession over it. How about let's fast forward to the late 1800s and Wisconsin's use of secessionist language and saying, we don't like the federal fugitive slave law, federal government. We don't want to have you use state resources to capture escaped slaves and then send them back to the South. We think that's wrong, and you're not going to use Wisconsin resources to do that. They threatened secession over it. Or what about the Virginia, I skipped over this, but this is a big one. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1788 and 1789, penned by none other than Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And in those two resolutions, which were drafted over the Alien and Sedition Acts, were the principle of the compact theory of the Union, the idea that the states created the Union, created the federal government, not the other way around. They had their own sovereignty and they delegated a certain portion of that sovereignty to the federal government, but they always retain that sovereignty. If at any point the federal government is not serving their interests as a state, they can reclaim their sovereignty and eliminate the compact that they have to create the Union. These are fundamental, foundational, governmental, organizational aspects of American history. These are people, these are documents, these are ideas that come from the minds of the founding generation that created this country. And they have taught again and again and again that secession is an integral part of American history. And it's important because, as the Virginia and Kentucky resolution said, it is the last bulwark of freedom against federal tyranny. If you can't get the federal courts to agree with you that Congress is doing something wrong or the president's doing something wrong, if you can't get Congress to stop passing laws like the Alien and Sedition Acts or the indefinite detention of American citizens without due process, the Patriot Act, et cetera, if you can't get the president to stop acting like a tyrant, what do you have left? If all three branches of the federal government agree that fuck the Constitution and we're going to support each other screwing the American people, what do you have left besides the states defending their own citizens and saying, fuck this, we're leaving the Union? That's all you have. That's the principle of secession. And it was used throughout American history for things other than for the South to secede to protect slavery, to any extent that you believe that that is the exclusive cause of the Civil War. So again, David, Hogg and other person over there whose last name I'm not going to say, is secession un-American, unbecoming of an elected representative, and have no place in America? I hope in that brief trot across history, you come to a resounding, yes, it's absolutely American. And we should praise it. David, where's the bobblehead? Go.
Bobblehead's right where it's always been. It's right in the middle.
Still not any closer?
Where it needs to be. But what I'm saying is that
get some movement.
No, but you did make me realize something. Is that it's, again, if there's one common denominator with all the conflagrations, whatever you want to call it, there's always one key actor that's involved in everything, and it's always the federal government. It's always the government. Like, I can't tell you how many times a year a blue state vote D, no matter he, they, he, she, vote blue no matter who, New Yorker comes down to a state for 6 months and lives because their weather is better in a place that elected an official, i.e. to Satan, refer back to the Epstein quota, that runs a state. And guess what? They aren't drawn and quartered. They're not hung up by the nearest tree. They're accepted. They're Americans. I don't think the real fight here is with a state-to-state basis. I think the real fight here is between the states and the federal government.
Well, that's what
truly-
secession is.
Well,
I don't
I understand that,
reacted.
but-
I want to take my state and
But
leave.
what I'm saying is, like, other states are going to look, well, you don't want to be a part of this? Like, why do you? It's like the thing that's tearing us all apart, the thing that's dividing us, the thing that lets Ohio burn because it's red, or a part of Ohio burn because it was red, not 4 years earlier said that, or the same entity that said that we are going to support this state because it voted red, or it just doesn't come out and say it. 4 years earlier, we're saying that Trump wasn't going to bail out Oregon because they had, or was it Portland? Portland or Oregon, right? He was going to bail them out because they wrote a bunch of fucking edicts under a fucking lockdown that eviscerated every amount of control that they had over the population, and it was running wild. He said, I'm not bailing them out. They're like, he's not bailing them out because they're blue. It's like, you guys don't care about helping anybody but yourselves or your particular platform at this point. Like, all you do is drive lines in between every amount of the population that you possibly can. You are the toxic girlfriend. You are the Meghan Markle that's pulling Harry, i.e. the United States, away from the royal family, which is unity. You are the toxic woman that is removing us from everything that keeps us who we are. And you don't give a fuck that you're doing it, just as long as you can make another payday tomorrow. And that's the real problem with this country. And that's where my little bobblehead will start moving to secession, because I don't think it's going to come to blows. I would hope this would be a peaceful secession, and all the states that leave it are going to show the national government that they can't play this game anymore. They can't keep using the population for its own machinations, for its own profiteering, and then never take responsibility for any of the malfeasance that comes from it. That's what I'm hoping for. So if my bobblehead were to move ever in any different direction, it'd be pro to show these stupid sons of bitches that we're all together. I think all 50 states should secede from the national government. I think they should do it right now. And I don't think...
I'd say the bobblehead's fully on the secession side.
I'm a Virgo. I'm either all for it or I'm all against it. So I'm saying, hey, 50 states will all secede from the union to show them we're not fucking around. Like this, you can't put a fucking dead man that is still capable of walking in the White House anymore. A dead man that has ties to other countries, foreign dictatorships, being paid. His son was getting paid by the same country that is at war with Russia right now, before he got elected to presidency. Like, and you just go, well, what can you do? It's like you can show them in one mass effect that we're not putting up with this shit anymore. You guys either got to fix your shit or we're leaving.
So now that I think that most of David's bobblehead is to the secession side, let me just make
As
sure.
long as we're all together.
We're
together against them.
Let me make sure I really drive the point home by demonstrating to David through 2 tweets that these people can't be reasoned with. And what is the only option you have left because David and I definitely agree on this point, I know for a fact, is that violence is not our option, not our option, is not our goal. We don't want this to go in the direction of violence. But as with the first Civil War, there's one side that wanted to leave and one side that wanted violence. It doesn't have to go that route. But if one side is hell-bent on violence no matter what, all you can do is walk away, hope that it doesn't come to violence, but defend yourself if you have to. So here's an example of that. And I'm going to take these 2 tweets together. This is from Marianne Williamson. I don't know if you remember her. She ran, I think, in 2016 in the Democratic primaries, and she said, "quote," talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene, "Did she just call for civil war? Does she know what happened the last time a few states said they wanted to leave?" And then the other tweet that's going to be taken in conjunction from that is also repeat guest, friend of the show, Adam Kinzinger, sorry, it slips. It's Freudian at this point. He says, quote, to be clear, the Union prevailing in the Civil War settled this question. All caps, you have no right or ability to have a national divorce. This was settled. Your side lost. So, a couple things about that. First of all, to answer your very simple question, Marianne Williamson, no. Marjorie Taylor Greene's tweet did not call for a civil war. She specifically called for a national divorce. That is a legal separation of political units. That's what it is. Happens all the time. As a matter of fact, there's plenty of examples, some in the not too distant past, which were completely peaceful. I went over to Prague in the Czech Republic for Christmas this last year, and I learned something that I hadn't known about, even though this took place in my lifetime, about the peaceful secession national divorce between the Czech Republic and what is its neighbor state? I'll find it for you. I'll find it for you. And in 91 or 92, something like that. And they still celebrate it today because the two countries look at each other as brothers. There's no animosity there, but they realized that they wanted to govern their own affairs. They did not want to share one government where jealousies could arise and, they would fight over who's being representative more and all that kind of stuff. They just decided to split, go their separate ways, have their own separate governments, and they remain brotherly and friendly and kind to this very day. That can happen in the United States. There's no reason it needs to turn bloody, but the only reason why it will turn bloody, going on from Marianne Williamson back to Adam Kinzinger, is because of that attitude. That attitude from Kinzinger. And that attitude existed in 1860, and that attitude exists now. And it's from people, sometimes in government, and sometimes just agitators outside of it, like he is now, since he's no longer an elected official, that think that their way is always the right way, and it's their way or the highway. You can't disagree. We talked about this during the C-word times. Even though they got 90+% uptake from most of the population, they obsessed compulsively over that last 10%. These people exist like Kinzinger. They will not allow the peaceful route to happen. But that doesn't make trying to leave people like him wrong. It's not morally unjustified. As a matter of fact, it's the most humane thing to do to people like him is to walk away from them. And if he comes and wants a fight after that, that's on him.
Aren't these coming from...
It just is self-defense after that. But setting that aside for a second, this underlying concept of the Civil War settled this question is this concept of might makes right. And this is no shocker from people who hold democracy as sacrosanct because they think that 51% can command the other 49% what to do just because they got the numbers. Well, that's how we used to settle things before we became a civilized species. The bigger caveman with the bigger stick hit the other guy, took his woman, took his food, and that's how things went for millennia.
Nice.
And then human beings civilized and they realized, let's talk about our differences. And if at the end of talking we can't agree, then we're going to go our separate ways. That's what secession is. That's what national divorce is. There is no need for violence unless people like Kinzinger get their way. And there is no settling of might makes right in this aspect. If that's the case, Kinzinger, then I guess every rapist who gets away with it was justified because that settled that question. He was going to get what he wanted. So, this mentality exists, but don't let that mentality dissuade you from finding merit and the humanity in the idea of secession and national divorce, because it is the only peaceful solution to irreconcilable differences when you have people like Kinzinger running around that say it's my way or the highway. Those people don't want compromise. They won't talk to you. They won't share a space with you, not without subjugating you. And the only option is to walk away. And that's why David's bobblehead is now fully over here on the national divorce side.
Why not? Or pull it back to the middle. Anyway, no, I'm completely in Dane's camp on the Kissinger. I almost called him Kissinger. Kinzinger?
Kinzinger? Yeah.
Kinzinger? Okay. Anyway, all I'm going to say is that kind of mentality it's so rife with parody. So let's take where he's coming from. He's coming from the side that bases all of the things that they do in moral diplomacy. They have the higher ground because they're always thinking about the downtrodden, those that don't have, and we had to stand up for them. So they have the moral high ground, right? Until you don't agree with us on the smallest iota of anything that we espouse. And what's their first reaction? It's not to combat you with a better idea than you just confronted them with. It's always violence. So, from these peaceful, very violent people, we are hearing that if you leave us, we'll fucking kill you. Does that not go back to what we've been saying this entire time? If you listen to what they're actually saying, you can't listen to them ever again. Like, he's not an elected official anymore. People clearly thought he wasn't fit for the job, but he still thinks that he has any say over what happens in this country whatsoever, that he should be listened to at all. Don't listen to don't listen to Cheney, don't listen to Kuxinger, don't listen to any formerly stationed politicians, because guess what? They weren't good enough to keep the position. And I'd say 80% of the ones that are keeping the position are only keeping it because they tote the party line and don't give a fuck about you anyway. So, to move my bobblehead all the way back to secession for a fucking second, we need to show these guys we're not doing this shit anymore. Figure it out. I'm not going to drink Coca-Cola because you give it to me all the time on radio broadcasts, on YouTube broadcasts, on cable broadcasts. I'm not going to ask my doctor about fucking Ozempic tomorrow because you paid for fucking advertising. I'm not going to have you shove things down my throat and go, oh, well, we didn't see this coming, even though we suppressed all these studies that said this was exactly where it was going to happen. And no, I'm not talking about the C word. And no, I'm not talking about the jab. I'm talking about all the myriad of things that happened before this, that all those people up on Capitol Hill that were supposed to be protecting you in whatever given state that you elected them from failed miserably at their job. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that at all. But what I will say is if they don't care about you as an individual, if they don't care down to your human rights of health and what should and should not be allowed to be put into your body to make you sicker, to make you a commodity to them, by the way, to make more profit off of you. If this wouldn't be the biggest protest in this nation's history, I'm for that. I'm for the biggest protest. Say all 50 states, we go, no, dude, we're gonna go our ways. We'll all agree with each other. And the only person that's gonna be left out is you. Because we are going to listen to you anymore because all you're doing is making it worse for all 50 of us, plus the territories that we have.
I know.
You're sum it up for me.
Well, no, you're trying to have your cake and eat it too by saying all 50 states stay together but secede from the federal government. But that's the point, right?
But that is the point. We're not enemies because we remove ourselves from the government.
Well, we are. I mean, listen, I will promise you this: the people that live in Alabama and vice versa see the people that live in California as their enemies. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
That's what they've been told.
Well, no, not just what they've been told. They have radically different worldviews.
Right.
They will not see the world the same way.
One amounts to more than the other. And that's where the conflict.
Well, no, look at how. So people from blue states, when they hear this concept of national divorce, the first thing they bring up is, well, the blue states pay all the taxes to the federal government and the red states are getting all of that benefit. So the blue states are really subsidizing the red states. So this would never work because the red states are poor and yada, yada, yada.
Well, the red states feed the blue
And what do the red states say? Right. The red states say, well, we grow all the food and blah, blah, blah. So the point is, like, just by starting the argument there, instead of trying to have a discussion about whether or not national divorce is a good idea, and whether it's morally justifiable and all of those other things that go into it, the first thing that both sides start doing is petty dick measuring about who's going to fare better when it happens. So that's what I'm telling you is those, if there were a situation where it became enough people that it was politically popular to start the discussions about the states themselves seceding from the federal government, then I can promise you this, that there will be secessions of states from other states. They will basically, regions will collectivize, like maybe some states like Texas and California that have large internal economies by themselves could become individual nation states. But for the most part, you're going to have like the states of New England form a little compact. The states of the Midwest form a little compact, or et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm saying is, no matter how much that happens, that's all to the good, better than what we have now.
Can I say this?
Yes, you can. And then I'm going to say the last thing about Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic, and because I looked it up because I forgot the specifics of it, and then we'll be done.
Divide and conquer. Maybe that's what they want us to do. Because they know that we'll eventually denigrate down to county by county, city by city, population by population, which is so much easier to just move through and just conquer all of them again and say, we all on the same page? We're good. David, move out.
Despite the federal government's world police status over the last 30 plus years,
if you don't let us fuck this asshole.
You know what 50% on the boots of the boots on the ground in those wars of foreign adventurism come from? The individual state national guards.
Okay.
So this idea that the federal government
moves me back towards this because it's a loss of life versus this. So go ahead.
So the idea that the federal government will maintain this sort of military dominant superiority to resubjugate the states is just
they don't have the backbone for it, but
right.
They do.
But I'm just saying
if they do.
Listen, I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that blood won't be shed because again, people like Kinzinger exist, and those people, psychopaths, are predominant in the positions of power that would make calls like that to basically force the states to stay. I'm not denying that blood might be shed. What I'm saying
blood will be shed.
What I'm saying is not only is that not guaranteed, it's not necessary, but more important than that, we should not let the fact that Kinzingers exist dissuade us from the objective truths about this whole thing, is that it is morally preferable. It is morally right. It is the most humane thing to do when you have groups of people that are so ideologically different that they see each other as nothing but existential threats to their own existence, the only place to go in that route to actually avoid violence, to decrease the chances of violence, is for them to go their separate ways. That's the only humane option that there is. And to say that just because Kinzingers are out there and would want to violently force them to stay does not take away from the moral legitimacy, the merit of that position, that national divorce, secession, whatever you want to call it, is justifiable on all those grounds.
The thing that I reserve my judgment on is that that's all based in, granted, very sustainable, very logical theory. Once you shut the lights out, all hell breaks loose. And we have to all adhere to a certain doctrine or it descends into chaos and we're so much more conquerable then. That's all I'm saying.
And I'm glad that you said that that's all on the round of theory, because that ties it up with the Czech Republic thing that I forgot, and which will be a nice little book into this, is it's not theory, because it's happened repeatedly throughout human history and within our lifetimes. So in addition, before I get to the Czech Republic thing, I'll just say that the vast majority of the breakup of the USSR was peaceful. There were a few violent revolutions of the overthrow of the communist regimes that were still in some of those satellite states of the USSR when the Iron Curtain fell. But for the most part, most of the states separated from the larger USSR on completely peaceful grounds. As a matter of fact, the country of Czechoslovakia, which came out of the fall of the Iron Curtain as one of those satellite states, separated from the USSR in the bloodless revolution called the Velvet Revolution of 1989. And it wasn't just 3 years later. And I'm so happy that this is the Czech Republic because of the personal family ties to this, and to show that not only is it not just theory, but it's actually legitimately in our blood. Is, as I was saying, it's what's called the Velvet Divorce. On December 31st, 1992, the now country of Czech Republic and the now country of Slovakia, which at that time were combined into Czechoslovakia, seeing that they wanted to govern their own affairs separately from each other, but always looking at themselves, at each other as brothers, as friends, as cousins, as not enemies in any way, shape, or form, decided to bloodlessly and non-violently separate. That's why it's called the Velvet Divorce. They now have their own separate governments with their own separate capitals, laws, regulations. They still trade. They still are brotherly. There was no bloodshed. There's no animosity, none of that. And if that can happen in the middle of continental Europe, where there's all this milieu of different ethnicities and different, groups and religions and all that kind of stuff, all jumbled together, then in the nation of America, which has two massive oceans on both sides, much harder to invade than it is central continental Europe if an outside foreign power wants to subjugate a now weaker state that is separated. Much less likely in the United States. And if the national conversation around national divorce in the United States can go in the direction of, listen, California, New York, Illinois, you think we're stupid and backwards. You think you have all of the right ideas. That's fine. Get all of the universal health care and all the social safety nets and all of the socialism and whatever you think is going to build your utopia. We're going to do what we think is best. We could still trade. We can still be brothers. We can still be friends. We don't need to fight over this, but you live your life and I'll live mine. It can happen. It has happened. And there's no reason to think that it can't or won't happen in the United States.
And my only rebuttal is, when the breakdown of the USSR happened, what still remained?
Russia. But Russia always existed as its own political entity.
To nuke everything. Because
as a result of?
Because people don't just accept the fact that there's borders anymore. They have political leaning.
That point is true whether the United States exists as an entity or it doesn't.
I don't know if it does.
But we've talked about on this podcast about the provocation of the Russian incursion into Ukraine.
I know that.
Is,
I know that.
again,
he says that it was because he's still indoctrinated in that USSR bullshit. He still wants it. So when you have a bad actor in politics,
or
it can throw everything off.
Or he has his own, version of the United States Monroe Doctrine that says, "Hey, don't invade and engage in our sphere of influence, or I'm going to defend my national borders."
Still a part of the stratum. And even though a sovereign nation was attacked by another sovereign nation, he said, "Don't do that." And yeah, we pushed him to it, but it might not be in our call. That's all I'm saying. It's like we don't know what happens after you pull that lever. That's all I'm saying.
I know we don't know.
I moved a little closer to secession, but I'm not going full bore.
I know we don't know what happens, David, but that is the point that I'm trying to make, is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If we choose not to go in this direction, and we just choose to continue fighting this already low-intensity civil war that's going on. The point you made about Trump not wanting to give federal funds to Oregon and all that kind of stuff.
I didn't think that. That was the thing that they said.
Well, but what I'm saying is that's a perfect example. There is already a low-intensity civil war going on in this country.
Yeah.
It's just done with economics and money and all of that kind of stuff. Bullets have not been exchanged yet. But if we think that just because the United States hasn't broken up, that's the only thing stopping the violence from breaking out, that is very misguided, because the violence can break out at any time. I mean, it already does in small scales, people fighting on the streets, Antifa.
Those peaceful protests that we had during first part.
So the United States existing as a political entity is not what's stopping that yet. What's stopping that is largely the American public being heavily armed. And that you can't exactly go on a 330 million person scale if you want to start fighting, because who knows how many are armed, what their arsenal looks like, and where their loyalties lie.
So it basically boils down to Texas and Florida holding down their sovereignty.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Against the blue hairs.
But let's take lessons from the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Please. Let's take lessons from peace. Let's just let other people live how they want to live. And let's not enforce our views onto other people. Because once you start doing that, I don't know, pronoun people, LGBTQ people, TRX, WX, Y, Z, RS, the sovereign nation of the United States telling everybody how they should live. Like, hey, let's just let people be people and live together in harmony. What a doctrine. But we live in reality, and we'll have to figure this shit out by either blood and bones or treaties and TDs. I don't know. I didn't know how to end that, Dane. But by God,
I don't know where David's bobblehead is on the chart.
It's slightly more
nameless, faceless video guy. Do your work.
First, my hand. If this is positive, if this is negative, and this is in the middle, meh. Just a little bit. It moved a little
progress.
Ladies moved a little towards
progress.
Okay?
We'll get him one day. We'll get him one day.
Anyway,
so
Dane.
I'm just going to say, before we sign out, a couple suggested readings on these topics if you would like to learn more. 2 books from a guy you've heard me mention on this podcast before. Love a lot of the stuff he writes. He's a historian. His name is Tom Woods, and he has 2 books. One, this is a free ebook that you can get, and that'll be the link in the description.
Woods, that piece of shit.
National Divorce, The Peaceful Solution to Irreconcilable Differences is an ebook that he published a couple years ago, which lays out the case for the case that I was trying to lay out to David, but he lays it out much better than I could. And then a regular book that you can get on Amazon, which is called Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. And why nullification? We're talking about national divorce. Nullification is basically the precursor to full-blown secession or national divorce. It's the way for the states to push back and say, federal government on this policy. One key example would be marijuana legalization. Feds still have it illegal. Some states have legalized it. They say, feds, on this policy, we don't agree with you. Your laws are what they are, but we're going to go our own separate way. California, Colorado, etc. So anyway, that is a great book on that concept as well.